Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Moyer from Millsboro PD. He has 18 years experience in law enforcement and is a former U.S. Marine. Welcome to the show, Chief Moyer.
Thank you, Paige. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I do want to dive into your background a little bit. Did you promote quickly? You seem
It
really
feels like
young.
it.
You
It
seem
feels
really
like it.
young. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm 41 years old. So to kind of give a little bit of understanding, we're a very small police department. We're authorized for 21. We have 20 officers. So I believe in God, and I believe He puts you in the right place at the right time. I don't know if I'm qualified to do this job, but the door opened up and I moved through that door. And I told myself as doors open up, if they close, I'm not kicking them in. And so this is where my path has taken me. And I feel like this is where I'm needed right now. And so, yeah, I do feel like it happened quickly.
Yeah. I think we were talking a little bit offline, but I think everyone can relate to having a little bit of a imposter syndrome sometimes. And I feel that way a lot, where I'm like, man, how did I get here? But it's a testament to the work that you did and the hard work that you put in, because I don't think that people are going to give opportunities freely. People are going to give opportunities to those who they think are prepared for that opportunity.
Yeah, and I've reached out to a lot of chiefs since taking this role, and you know, people that have been doing this a very long time still claim that they feel like they're imposter syndrome, and I think that that's the true testament of leadership in the sense that you need to be constantly evaluating yourself and seeing where you're failing and how you can do better, and then also learn from other people. We don't all have it figured out, and if we can learn from other people's failures, then that's the best way to move forward.
Yeah, and I think it keeps you grounded and it keeps you humble when you can have those moments of self-assessment. And I've said this so many times, but I think the biggest flex, I'm going to talk like I'm a young kid, but I'm not. The biggest flex is to always be a learner and to be always willing to grow and adapt. And I
Mhm.
think that that's also a testament of leadership. Can you continue to grow and evolve, or are you stuck in your ways? Are you a learner? Are you a grower, or are you stagnant? So I think that it's a huge compliment if people look at you and they understand that you're willing to listen and you're willing to learn.
Especially in law enforcement, it's a moving target.
Mm.
The society is changing, leadership is changing. The people we're bringing in are younger and younger generation. So we have to be able to evolve with that, and in order to keep up with it and making sure that we're meeting not only society's needs, but we're also meeting our staff's needs.
100%. I did want to circle back to something you said earlier, and I want to dive a little bit into your leadership philosophy, because I think it's really interesting, and I want you to dive in as much as you want to. But you said earlier, reaching out to other chiefs and sharing, maybe this imposter syndrome or like, am I qualified? Am I doing the right things? It takes a level of vulnerability to be able to say that and to have those conversations. One, do you think vulnerability is essential for leadership? And two, what is your leadership style or philosophy, and how do you approach that within your organization?
So vulnerability for me works. I'm not going to, nothing I say today is going to say it works in every agency.
Mm.
Larger agencies, it may not work for, but I know for a small department like I know every one of my officers. I know who they're married to. I know their kids. And they expect vulnerability. I came from the same ranks as they came. I didn't come from an outside agency. I started as a police officer within this agency and I promoted from within. And so I've been in their shoes. I've handled a lot of bad cases. And I think being vulnerable lets them know that it's okay to be vulnerable. Um, I've talked about in pre meetings about things relating to my history and what I've seen in law enforcement, and what I've experienced and how it was addressed then and what I want to change going forward. And I can dive into that if you want, but I definitely think that vulnerability gives comfort to the guys that it's okay to not be okay sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you. And then tell us about your leadership philosophy and style as a whole, because I know micromanaging is not a part of that.
No, it definitely is not. So um, I have been micromanaged and I didn't like it. I feel there's two micromanaging is not leading. Leading is getting your people to buy in to the mission, to the goals and objectives, and then leading them along the way. So one thing that I've done early on was I took away the where I make the goals and objectives each year for the department. It's not my ship to run. I'm serving my officers. Um, and so I brought it in as a team. We built a goals and objectives committee where everybody from the youngest officer all the way up to the highest ranking officer has input into where we're going to take the department that year. And that does multiple things. For one, it lets them know that they're being heard and that no matter who you are, if you have a good idea, we're going to take it. And then secondly, it gives them the buy-in to say that when it's time to accomplish these goals, that they know that they're the ones who made these goals. And so we're going to push it across the line. And then at the end of the year, we recap everything and we say, did we accomplish our goals and what can we do better for next year? The one question I ask at the beginning of every meeting is, if we polled 100 people in the town of Millsboro right now, where or what is one word that you think that they would describe the Millsboro Police Department? And then we'd go around the room and we collect that one word. And then we say, if we poll 100 people from the town of Millsboro a year from now, what word do you hope that they describe the Millsboro Police Department at? And then we set that as our goal. How can we achieve these words as being our descriptors?
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. How do you think since implementing this that's changed the officers and their outlook?
So I always take feedback from my officers with a grain of salt because I am the chief of police and I feel like I know what I did back then. And anytime you spoke to a chief, it was a yes, sir. So I look at what are some quantifiable metrics within my department that I can say this is working or it's not working. I can tell you that prior to having this ability, we were at a turnover ratio of 1 to 2 officers a year. We were losing officers either to burnout, discipline, or going to other agencies. Since I've taken over and started implementing this, I think morale is higher. We have zero turnover in the last year. We're about to reach full capacity in the fall, which we've never seen. We've been allotted for 21 officers since 2018, and we've never seen 21 officers, and we're going to see it this year. We've added more civilian staff. We're taking, with a small agency, a lot of times you wear multiple hats. So I'm bringing in civilians, I'm bringing in extra staff that take that burden off of them so they can focus on doing the job that honestly, when they're young, is the funnest part of the job. The promotions is when it becomes boring and tedious and you start hating your job. But as a patrolman, as a corporal, that's the funnest time of your career. And I want these guys to go out there and have fun. I want them to do it safely, but I want them to have fun the same way I did.
Yeah, thank you for that. What do you think? I know you've implemented in some different wellness programs, initiatives. Is there any one that stood out to you?
So the state was, we had an officer that committed a suicide up in Newcastle County. Delaware is a 3 county state, so we're all very close. And the state kind of took notice at that, and there was funding allotted through a bill by the state to implement a wellness app that can be available to all law enforcement agency. Well, as chiefs commonly do, egos got involved, and one chief wanted to go with this app, and the other chief wanted to go with this app, and it became where the funding was getting held up because no one chief. So I wrote a letter to the governor and to the director, Delaware Homeland Security, and I just said, like, listen, we are doing our officers a disservice by holding up this money. At the end of the day, not making a decision is worse than making the wrong decision. So we need to just choose one of these wellness apps and get it implemented so we can start getting these officers to help. Within a week, that funding was released. They chose an app and it got rolled out to all agencies. So I'm not saying my words alone was the one that got it, but it kind of gives officers a resource, and it's also available to significant others of officers. And it's not trackable. The one login per agency. So I don't know what anybody else is looking at. I can look at it to see what is commonly being searched. So I can tailor policies and education towards certain things. If, for instance, finance problems becomes a big issue, maybe I could bring in an instructor to talk about, proper financing and whatnot. But other than that, I don't know who's looking at that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's very important.
I want to come back to something that you said earlier that I definitely don't want to skip out on. And this
Okay.
was actually something that I thought was really interesting in your philosophy and your style. But you said that sharing personal stories was really powerful and something that you think is really effective. Do you have any personal stories that you're willing to share that maybe you share with your department when it comes to health and wellness and longevity?
Yes. So early on in my career, I had just gotten off field training, and it was my first year in law enforcement. And a town just north of us, we were basically butted up next to each other. An officer gets into a pursuit, and then I hear an officer is in trouble, and that he's been shot. So, not really knowing what I'm doing, I go up there, and it wasn't skill. I ended up finding the vehicle without any direction or knowing where I was going, but I was there when the officer was being pulled out of the car. I remember seeing him bleeding, gurgling for blood. We got a description of the suspect, and we know he was in the area. So I was like, what are the chances that I'll be here when we're pulling his body out, and I'll be there when we find the suspect? But I ended up being at the house right where the suspect is at. And I remember looking at all the officers that were around it, and they were all just rushing in. And I remember hesitating. As a new officer, I hesitated, and I was scared. And I remember feeling scared, and I took cover in the back in case he ran out the back. But I was forever holding myself accountable, and wondering, am I right for this job? Because I remember feeling scared, and I wondered, should I even be doing this? And I felt guilty for feeling scared. So, I think I lived most of my career trying to live up and prove to people that I wasn't scared. So I took unnecessary risks. I put myself in very dangerous situations as a way to try to, prove to people that I'm not that scared person. If I could go back and do it again, I would run into that house, um, and that wasn't fair to my family. I never truly addressed it that night. Instead of talking about it, I was told, hey, you're the youngest man on duty. You go back and handle complaints. And then I handled calls for the rest of the night. And we never talked about it. There was I remember people cracking jokes about it and thinking, like, how can they be cracking jokes about this? This is a terrible thing that happened. So it was never addressed. It was a macho man's world, and you don't show weakness, and that's what I learned in the Marine Corps, and that's what I figured that law enforcement was going to be too. And then we fast forward a couple years. Last year, July, I'm a lieutenant. I'm working sex crimes. I'm working child abuse cases. Tough stuff. But every now and then I want to go out on the road and I want to work a road. So I picked up a DUI shift, and I'm out there, and I pick up a vehicle that was called out by dispatch as a possible mental health patient, guy threatening to commit suicide. I get in a pursuit with him, and it ends with he takes an AR-15 and unloads it into my vehicle. And it hasn't even been a year since that happened. glass flying over my head had I not ducked when I did. I shouldn't be alive right now. To make it short, um, and he ended up, that ended. Fortunately, obviously, I'm here talking to you. I have another trooper that I can say, truly saved my life that night by showing up to help me out that night. Um, but we take what happened in the beginning of my career, and then we look at what happens now. So after this, what do they do? They sit us in a room and they go one by one and say, "Tell me about your experience." And I was actually able to tell. I The story that I told you about my early career, I never got to tell anybody until I became chief of police. So now the first thing that somebody does is say, "Hey, this is off the record. This isn't part of an investigation. Let's sit here. We're covered under confidentiality. Tell me what you went through that night." And I was able to actually tell somebody what I experienced, what I saw. And then I was able to sit in the room with the other people that were there, the trooper that saved my life, and hear his side of the story and how it affected him and fears from other officers. And that was truly healing to be able to just talk about it. And somebody asked me, "Hey, what would you go through?" That just doesn't happen. And so I see that law enforcement is really changing in the sense that they understand the the mental health aspect of it and how important it is to have that after action debriefing and just have an opportunity to talk about what it is that you went through.
Yeah. Do you think that that has now impacted how you lead today as chief of police? Do you feel like that opened up your eyes or gave you maybe skills that you didn't have before to be able to lead the men and women of your organization and let them know that it's okay and share those pieces of you?
I think 100% that has changed. It has really changed my entire paradigm. Um, I look at every leadership moment now through the lens of, should I be yelling at this person or should I understand and try to understand what it is that they're looking through? And yes, again, today we had a case, my team had a case that involved very traumatic moments with a young child. First thing I did was like, I took them into a room after the case was over and I spoke with each one in a group setting and said, like, "Hey, how are you guys doing? Let's check in. What is it that you felt? What stuck with you during this case? Are you taking any of this home? What are some good methods of dealing with it? What are some bad methods of dealing with it?
Mhm.
How can we help each other during this event?" And that's something we've never been able to do here at the police department. And the feedback I'm getting on that is just really super positive.
Yeah, and one thing that you said earlier that I think was really relatable to all of us is that we're all gonna make mistakes, and there's always gonna be times where we wish that maybe we would have done something different or better. And I appreciate you showing the human side of you in that first story of being so new
Mhm.
to this career, being scared and hesitating, which is a totally human thing to do, right? Especially when you're new. And then for you to say just now, like, what are good ways and bad ways to deal with that? And when you were younger, the way that you dealt with that is overcompensation and maybe
Right.
putting yourself in risky situations. And now that you've progressed in your career and you've had a few of these experiences, and you've seen the opposite side of that of like, okay, what are some of those productive things that we can do to help offload and help move through it? Now you can show up better for your team and you can relay those stories to them. But I think it's incredibly human to be scared. It's human to be sad. It's human to be stressed. It's human to do all of these things. But I do think historically we all just kind of tried to shove it down and toughen up. And a lot of times we see other people choosing unhealthy coping mechanisms for those things. And I agree with you. I think that we've come a long way with wellness and having a conversation about, how do we process those things and how do we normalize mistakes. And I had a chief say mistakes are different than misconduct, like trying to have a differentiator.
Yeah.
But, how do we support healthy coping mechanisms and how do we understand that we're all going to make mistakes because we're human and how do we learn and how do we grow and how do we develop ourselves from there?
Yeah, I make sure that at the end of every conversation, because, you know, we are human, but there's no definition of what human is, right? And so I've heard some people say, am I messed up because it doesn't bother me, whereas it bothers this person?
Mm.
And I end every conversation. It's okay to be okay, and it's okay to not be okay. However, it is that you feel about it is okay. We're here to support you. So don't feel guilty because it didn't bother you. But also, the days of you struggling with a certain case and then the chief takes your gun and badge and tells you you got to go to a psychiatrist, those aren't going to happen anymore.
Right.
We're here to help you through it, and if need be, we can get you that help. But we we help people every single day. We can't even help our own people. That needs to be the aspect is we can't do anything unless we start helping each other first, and then our focus can be outside the department.
100%. Thank you.
What do you tell the young officers who are just coming in who may not have experienced that yet, but you know that they're going to eventually? Do you have any?
So what I've recently been starting to tell them is whether you have a counselor or not, go ahead and get a counselor. Get them on standby. Get a baseline set, because you may not need them right now. You may be everything's okay. But I promise you, it's not if, it's when you are going to have a case that's going to rock your world. It's going to shatter you. You're going to relate it to something in your childhood. You're going to relate it to your family life. You're going to bring it home with you. And you need to be able to have that counselor on standby, ready to go, not as a new patient ready to go in that has to build everything from the ground up, but do those regular check ins. And then when something happens, be able to just go to them and say, hey, I need to talk to you. This is what happened this week. I just need to talk it out with somebody, because we all love our significant others, but it's not their responsibility to be our counselor. And that's how marriages start breaking down. I've lost one doing it, because I've made them my shitting post. And at the end of the day, it's not fair to them. Do your significant other a favor and have that counselor ready to go on standby. They'll appreciate it as well.
I was going to ask, that was my second part to that question is how, and it's going to be just how do you separate the two, like to make sure that you're not going home and carrying this with you?
Oh, that has been a struggle my entire career. Like I said, I've lost one marriage because I wasn't able to separate. I never dealt with the first murder of a police officer. I took that home every single night, and then I blamed her, for not understanding, even though I wasn't communicating. Um, Very immature, and I've talked about it with you guys in the past, but learning from your failures. I've only become where I'm at is because I have failed multiple times. But if I take those failures and I blame it on somebody else, which I did for a long time, I never grow, And so I think failing a lot of times leads to, if you can accept it and move forward and learn from it, it gets you further in your career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a saying, and it's the fear, do you have a fear of failure or a fear of other people seeing you fail?
Right.
And that sort of leads you into your next step is just allowing yourself to fail, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate it. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
sharing that.
Have you guys heard the expression of failing forward? Have you
It's
heard that?
interesting you say that. So my Christmas present to every staff member this year was the book Failing Forward.
Really? Okay. For everyone listening, that was not planned or scripted. But you said that before, it's like failure is necessary for growth and for success, but as long as you're failing forward, as long as we're, continuing to move forward.
Right.
And it sounds to me, and I want to kind of circle back to the first part of the question that Jess asked, but it sounds to me like you really try to take a proactive approach with everything. Have these conversations early, make sure that everyone has resources early, because we know it's not if, it's when these things are going to happen. And
Right.
I have never, ever met someone who hasn't failed. And the people who are at the top of their game have probably failed more than they've succeeded, but we're not I don't want to say we're not willing, but maybe sometimes we're afraid to share the messy parts and the failures with other
Right.
people. And I've said this before, but I think it's a superpower for the people who are at the top of their game, whether that's, within law enforcement or another profession. How can we start sharing that, as learning lessons? Like, how can we tell people, yeah, I failed way more than I've succeeded. And this is how I've been able to fail forward. This is how I've been able to grow so that when other people are in that same position and they're going through those moments of failure, that they understand that they're not the only ones, that it's a necessary step to get to where you're going, that we're never going to be perfect out of the box. So it sounds to me like you're having those conversations early. You're willing to share some of those messy parts and those failures with your team so that they know that they're not alone in that. And I always tell everyone when it comes to wellness, it's just like you go to the dentist twice a year. Hopefully, you guys are doing that. You're not going to the dentist because you already have a cavity. You're going to the dentist so that you can prevent those things from happening,
Right.
right? And so it's the same thing. It's like, how can we start training wellness earlier so that we're prepared if and when something happens? And I've said it before, and this is like a cliche, but you don't rise to the level of opportunity, you fall to the level of your training. So how can we make sure that we have proactive training so when something happens, you can fall back on that?
Right.
My last question for you, and then you're off the hook, is for the younger generation, which we've already talked a little bit about some of those conversations you have, but um, if you could go back in time and you could speak to the younger you with all of the knowledge and experience that you have now, what words of wisdom would you share?
So it's gonna kind of be beating a dead horse here. And I thought about this, and so I'm gonna say accept your mistakes, accept your failures. For a good portion of my career, I thought I was perfect. I had this ego the size of Texas, and I didn't do anything wrong. Somebody else did something wrong, and I finally, after getting in trouble, right, I took a long, hard look at myself, and I said, "Is this a me problem, or is this somebody else's problem?" And I took the acceptance that it is a me problem, and that is the key moment in my career where I can say I started to grow. After that, yeah, I came in and I had to deal with the punishment of getting in trouble here at work. Um, but I use it as a growth moment. And from there on out, I realized that every failure is an opportunity to grow. So own your mistakes. And that starts with being able to accept that, I did wrong. Self reflection and looking at yourself and saying, how could I have done this better? And not blaming other people. If I could have done that earlier, who knows where I'd be right now. But um, I appreciate the people in my life who held me accountable. And that to me is my mantra as chief. I put it above my desk, hold me accountable and don't be afraid to challenge me. It's a sign that every officer that walks in here says that I'm not going to be perfect. But I have a team. I have an enormous amount of great people that I work with who all have great ideas. And together we can get this done. And I'm willing to learn. I'm always going to be learning. I'm never going to get it right. So,
Thank you. I love it. I lied to you when I said that was my last question because I
okay.
have a follow-up to what you just said. Do you think that younger officers can do that, or do you feel like it's something that we have to learn after making mistakes?
I can only tell you from my perspective. For me, I have to learn it after making
Yeah.
mistakes. My parents gave me a ton of good advice that I thought was dumb. And now here I am giving that same advice to my kids because I realized that it was right. Had I just listened to it when I was 17 years old, I wouldn't have ever made those mistakes. But the mistakes are the journey and the story. Nobody's read a book that is all good stuff. There has to be some mistakes along the way in order to have a good story. And my story's still growing. I'm new as a chief. I've listened to a lot of people on your podcast, and I take a lot of wisdom from them. So I don't know what wisdom I have, but again, my story's still growing, and I hope that maybe a couple years from now we can circle back and do this again, and maybe I can tell you I was all wrong and I've figured out a better way.
I love it. And I think it's so relatable. Like as soon as you said like my parents said stuff and I should have listened, I'm like, me too. And so any young person out there who's listening to this, listen to your elders because they probably have some really good advice for you that maybe you just don't know it yet.
Yeah, I will second that.
Jess, you have any more questions before we wrap? Did we miss anything?
I think we covered it all.
Well, thank you, Chief Moyer.
Thank
Thank
you. I
you for
love
your
what you guys are
time.
doing. I honestly, I'll tell you that I really started listening to your podcast in kind of preparation for this interview, but now I'm hooked. So, like, I see that my problems and stuff I'm dealing with is universal across the United States, and I've saw some really good ideas in your podcast. So, what you're doing for law enforcement is it's invaluable. Like you can't put a number on it. You're doing good work, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. We
We
appreciate
appreciate your service.